They've been governing Afghanistan for almost 5 months, but according to much of the international community, so far the Taliban have failed to keep their promises. And the people of Afghanistan are paying the price as most of the world turns a blind eye to a worsening crisis. The Taliban have been criticized for rolling back women's rights, restricting their travel, employment and education. And its recent move to dissolve Afghanistan's election commission is also raising questions on whether the Taliban will ever hold free and fair elections. But the United Nations is warning of more pressing issues, saying that over 90% of the country's population is now in dire need. While Afghanistan's neighbors continue to argue that working with the Taliban is the only viable option to stabilize the country, many are also asking how long the world should wait for the group to deliver on its promises. And to discuss where Afghanistan could be headed, I'm joined now by Hussein Avni Botsalı. He is the former OIC envoy to Afghanistan. And from Washington, D.C., Omar Samat. He is a former Afghan diplomat. Gentlemen, welcome and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. Omar, it's been 5 months since the Taliban swept to power, but has Afghanistan fallen off the international headlines?
Well, partially it has, especially in the West. I think that not only was there Afghanistan fatigue, but obviously the fall of Kabul, the way it happened, the chaos that ensued for the couple of weeks after that. And now the era of Taliban consolidation of power obviously has shifted attention from the West away to other hotspots. But there is still obviously not only some level of interest, but also concern about where Afghanistan is headed. But in the region, in the neighborhood of Afghanistan, I think that the focus on Afghanistan still remains very high. The concern is very high.
Yes.
And the countries surrounding Afghanistan want to see what's going to happen.
So you're saying you've been in Afghanistan for the last 2 months. What have you seen and what's the current situation in the country?
First of all, I would like to underline that the security situation has not deteriorated since the arrival of Taliban. And throughout the last 2 months, I was able to walk on the streets day and night. The robbery, ordinary criminal cases seem to be diminished very significantly. And unfortunately, the streets of Kabul, the shops are closed, economic life has come to a de facto standstill. There is anxiety among people, but there's not harassment or the feared repetition of the Taliban practices of the 1990s. This is a good omen, but yet there is a very clear unresolved state of affairs. There's no alternative but to engage Taliban, but how to engage, how to expand the inclusivity, how to bring up the current level of administration to an acceptable format, which all the Afghans will feel belonging to.
So
these are the questions pending.
So Omar, what's your take on that? How to engage with the Taliban? Afghanistan former President Hamid Karzai said that the world should work with the Taliban, but how long does the international community need to wait for Taliban to honor its promises, deliver on its promises, or this should be an engagement to be open-ended?
Well, I agree that engagement is very important. It's a question of what kind of engagement, at what level, and for what purpose. And remember, it takes 2 hands to clap, or as some people say, it takes 2 to tango. So in Afghanistan, in this case, you have the international community that is somewhat have consensus at some level, but I see some divergences emerge over time. And then on the other side, you have the Taliban. And obviously, you have some other Afghan political and social constituencies that are not as engaged as they should be. I think that the issue of legitimacy at home for the Taliban and legitimacy abroad, which could lead to recognition, are some major challenges. And how the Taliban handle it is one thing. How the international community either enables or hinders that
Yes.
effort is another question. So there are a lot of different viewpoints on that.
So, Hussein, what steps have the Taliban government taken to secure international recognition so far? Because you've been there for the last 2 months. And to what degree is achieving a recognition a priority for the Taliban?
Taliban declared general amnesty, and to a great extent, the attacks to civilian targets seems to have ceased. There has been a limited number of executions and harassment and revenge acts, but this is not a general state of affairs. So currently, what we are faced with a window of opportunity where there is a de facto end of hostilities. For 40 years, people were looking for ceasefires, etc. There is an end of conflict which has come into being. How to transform or evolve from this point into a genuine inter-Afghan dialogue and expansion into a representative government is the major question to answer. Taliban is willing, but they also have their declarations that they don't want to move back. Regarding the issue of universal human rights, women's rights, etc.,
Yes.
it is also important to understand the genuine state of affairs in the past 2-3 centuries in Afghanistan. You have a very conservative countryside and an emergent middle class. So we need to keep the middle class and prevent them from fleeing the country. We have 500,000 families which have not been receiving salaries in the state departments. The prevention of state implosion and institutional support and provision of salaries to state employees is of crucial importance in addition to humanitarian emergency.
Yeah, speaking of the middle class, Omar, the World Food Programme says that half of Afghanistan's population face an acute hunger crisis and 3.2 million children under age 5 are at risk. How has the international aid cutoff worsened the situation, and how to mitigate Afghanistan's economic and humanitarian crisis? What's the solution here?
Well, absolutely. So on one hand, the Taliban came into power with empty coffers. The previous government had emptied almost everything. There was a lot of corruption. And then the international community, for a variety of reasons that we know, imposed sanctions. There were already some sanctions in place against the Taliban. Now everybody realizes that there is a dire need to find out-of-the-box solutions to aid the Afghans so they don't starve. And to make sure that there's some amount of liquidity and financial activity leading to some making sure that businesses don't fall, small businesses especially, that trade picks up, and that the country can stand on its feet. Salaries have to be paid, as the ambassador said. That is absolutely crucial. And I think that the international community can do much more to infuse money in the area of education and health and salaries to make sure that the middle class or the urban population of Afghanistan do not suffer more than they already have.
So, Hussein, UN Security Council agreed to facilitate aid to Afghanistan while keeping it out of Taliban hands. Is this a sustainable solution as the country sinks into destitution, and for how long the world will continue to ignore the civilians as well as this government of Afghanistan?
In the absence of recognition, the new role of UN is gaining prominence, and it is gaining strategic dimensions. Security Council rightfully demonstrated flexibility in provision of humanitarian assistance, and this was immediately followed by the US Treasury deciding on 3 resolutions relaxing the sanctions on flow of humanitarian sector and the supportive sectors and the activities of the NGOs. But this is not enough.
Yes.
I think the right steps are in progress. On the 19th of December, Pakistan, as a neighboring country and a strategic neighbor of Afghanistan, convened the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Extraordinary Ministerial Session, which adopted a new resolution. Unfortunately, a quantified decision was not taken on humanitarian assistance, but OIC is following in the footsteps of the United Nations. These two organizations have the potential to make a difference. In January, we will have a new UN mandate. The new UN mandate must concentrate on humanitarian assistance and preventive diplomacy, peace building.
So we see some neighboring countries are shouldering some responsibility in this regard. But Omar, what's the European approach to this situation in Afghanistan, since their main concern remains to be the refugees?
On one hand, the Europeans obviously are continuing to assist and provide funds for the humanitarian effort. On the other hand, there is obviously a wait-and-see attitude when it comes to the political scenery. I think that everybody wants to see to what extent are the Taliban showing flexibility, to what extent are they going to create a more professional and more accountable and more representative government, to what extent are they going to take care of human rights and allow girls to go back to school and women to work, of course, within the confines of Islam, and as part of hopefully a political process, again, that will strengthen reconciliation in Afghanistan.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.